Hi, thank you very much. Today we're going to talk about bias still. So, what's hidden between the lines, spotting bias, and assumption in reading. This is our seventh meeting actually, 7 week, and we're going to discuss this. And we have touched some of that in our meeting previously. Let's look at this for a while. There are two headlines here: Youth Protest for Justice and Road Detents Disrupt City Streets. Now, spot the bias. Which headline sounds more natural and why? Headline A, it's more natural because it's showing that the youth protest for justice. Headline B, it's more on the teen behavior disturbing the city street for whatever reason. It's not clear, but the youth protest for justice, that's clearer. So it sounds more natural in a way. So to this objective of this short video is to identify a bias and assumption in written text and understand how they affect the text credibility. And we're going to practice spotting the bias in a real example. The third one, the practice, you have to do it online in our online channel. Yeah. So thank you for that. Let's move on. Start with this one. What is bias? Bias, the definition is preference or prejudice for or prejudice against something or someone. So preference or prejudice, whether that's for or against. For example, this article is clearly pro-government. Yeah. So this one is it's bias. This article is clearly pro without any explanation and make the prejudice against the government. Yeah. So can be against someone, but sometimes bias can be explicit. Sometimes it's subtle, and we're going to have a look at that in with an example. Yeah. Before we move on now, let's have a look at what is assumption. An idea that the author believes is true without proving it. So the case without proving it. For example, online learning is ineffective. Where, when, how, there's no clear explanation about that. Online learning is ineffective. Then assumption, all students learn the same way. It's effective for some, maybe it's not effective for some. So here the assumption is that all students learn the same way, so online learning is ineffective. Why bias and assumption matter? Number one, shape how information is presented. That's influence the reader's perception as well, and it can weaken arguments if unchecked. The question is all bias bad? Now, all bias not necessarily bad. Bias is natural. It's part of human thinking. Not all bias is harmful. Yeah, so it's common that people have bias. Yeah, some bias is even useful or necessary, but it becomes problematic with interview fairness when we look at it's fair or unfair, accuracy, whether it's accurate or not accurate. We have to be careful with the bias, or when we are in a situation that we have to make a critical judgment on that. Okay, when bias can be useful, yeah, look at the moral bias, for example. A journalist refuses to glorify violence in reporting. For example, just mentioning numbers of casualties. So that's why that's not bad, because that's reflect the value that protects society or human rights. Cultural bias, for example, a teacher using local examples that reflect student background. In the heat like this, at the middle of the day, for example, it's very difficult for students to read and concentrate. That's giving example. Yeah, that's help to connect to the learning with students' real life situation. But that's not, maybe it's not working with or in the other part of area. Yeah, survival bias, trusting warning from the past experience, for example. to not walk through that alley. It's dangerous. There are a lot of ghosts or whatever. A lot of dog will chase you. That's help make us making a very fast decision when time is limited. So bias can be useful in that sense. Now, when bias become harmful, confirmation bias, only reading resources that support your opinion, that's against your opinion, you will not read that. Why that's not always bad? Because that's prevent growth and balance of understanding. Yeah. So that's become harmful in this way. Stereotyping, assuming the rural people are less educated. That leads to unfair judgment and discrimination. So that's harmful and bad. Yeah. Um, that's an example of that. Commercial, that's always or almost always bias. For example, promoting a scientific product without evidence that will mislead the audience or distort the. We're going to have a look at a real example in a minute. Okay, bias is not automatically bad. It depends on the context, depends on the awareness, and also the impact. So the key in critical reading is to recognize bias, questions its influence, and decide whether it strengthens or weaken the text credibility. And then you make the decision. Okay, let's look at the type of bias. Political, could be cultural, could be personal, commercial, advertising, and also media framing. I mentioned earlier. Now let's go through one by one very quickly on this. Yeah, for example, political bias. The new policy introduced by the conservative government is a complete disaster for working class citizens. And if you look at the language that shows the negative stance toward one political group without balance or evaluation or without facts. So when that sentence stay alone like that, then it shows a negative stance. So that's an example of political bias. Cultural bias, for example, Western education system are clearly superior to those in developing countries. That statement assumes that Western norms are better, disregarding the value of diverse educational approaches as well around the world. Yeah, so that's an example of cultural bias. Now, this is an example of personal bias. As someone who has always hated math, I believe it's unnecessary for most careers. That's the opinion is influenced by the writer's personal experience. Of course, it's not an objective evidence. An example of commercial bias or advertising bias. Clinically proven, our vitamin supplement will make you feel younger and more energetic. The statement promote a product using persuasive and vague claims. Well, that's often found in marketing language. It's also found in newspaper, in the magazine, and even in a TV or TikTok or other social media. Yeah, now come to media framing bias. For example, local hero confronts aggressive protesters downtown. The word hero and aggressive frame the story to favor one side and demonize the other, influencing public perception and public opinion. Yeah, that's an example of media framing. Now, how to detect bias in a text? When it's loaded or a lot of emotional words there, one-sided argument only, incomplete or omission of facts or voices, the tone you can recognize by the tone or sarcasm that they use, or generalization. Yeah, that you can detect the bias in the text. Now, detecting assumption, then you have to ask question: what is the author taking for granted? Is there a hidden value judgment? Would the argument still work without it? So you have to ask at least these three questions, and then you will detect the assumption, and then you can draw conclusion. Yeah, this is an example of short, very short text for exercise um, to check your understanding about bias and assumption. Now, technology in education, for example, online learning has made students lazier and more dependent on gadgets. In the past, students used to go to libraries and engage with real books. Today's learners cannot focus more than 5 minutes without checking their phone. Clearly, technology has ruined the discipline and the curiosity that education once fostered. Question: what is one example of bias in this paragraph? What is one assumption made by the author? Do you agree or disagree with the author's stance? And why? If you can explain that, then meaning you understand about bias and also assumption. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and I give you some exercise in the learning management system. Go and check and do the two, I think two or three exercises. Thank you.